Prophet Ismail's story begins during the time of his father's prophecy. Prophet Ibrahim called the people to worship Allah for a long, long time. There was nobody willing to listen in Babylon except for one man and a woman. The woman's name was Sarah, and later she became his wife. And the man's name was his nephew Lot, peace be upon him, who would later become a prophet as well. After years of calling people to Allah, the prophet realized that nobody else was going to listen to his words. So he decided to migrate to another country. He wanted to spread the message of Allah in another nation. The prophet then asked his father to join him, but he refused. The prophets Sarah and Lut then started their long, long journey. They helped the poor they could find on the way, and they did many good deeds that made people happy. In the meantime, the prophet Lut migrated to the Dead Sea and settled down there. And after a few months, the prophet married Sarah. She was a good believer, and they wanted to have children who would spread the message of Allah after their time. The prophet and his wife traveled again for many days through the desert. One day they happened to enter the territory of an evil king. The evil king came to know about the beautiful wife of the prophet, and he wanted to take her. So he sent one of his soldiers to bring the prophet to him. The soldier brought the prophet before the king. "Who is the lady accompanying you?" asked the evil king. The prophet replied that she was his sister. The evil king then asked the prophet to bring Sarah to his court. He said that he wanted to meet this beautiful woman that everyone in his kingdom was talking about. The prophet went to his wife and said, "The king wants to meet you. Do not ever tell him that you are my wife, because I've told him that you are my sister," the prophet told his wife. When Sarah went to the king's palace, the king was struck by her beauty, and he tried to take hold of her with his hands. But the moment his hand got near Sarah, it became stiff, and he could not move it. The king was so scared that he requested Sarah, "Please pray to Allah for me, and I will never harm you." When Sarah prayed to Allah, his hands got cured miraculously. But the moment he realized that his hands were cured, the foolish king tried to take hold of Sarah again, and for the second time his hands got stiff. The king couldn't move his hands at all. "Please pray to Allah for me, I shall never harm you again." Sarah prayed to Allah again, and his hands got cured for the second time. This time the king realized that Sarah was no ordinary woman, so he gave Sarah a gift. He gave her one of his Egyptian maidservants, and her name was Hajar. When Sarah returned home, the prophet asked her what happened. "Allah taught that evil king a lesson, and he gave me a maid, Hajar," replied Sarah. Years passed, and the prophet grew old. His hair grayed, but he continued to call people back to Allah. Sarah too had grown old, and she realized that she would no longer be able to give birth to a child. So she asked the prophet to marry their servant, Hajar. She then prayed to Allah to bless them with a child. After a few months, Hajar gave birth to a child, and they named him Ismail. By now, the prophet had grown very old. One day, the prophet woke up, and he felt like Allah wanted him to do something. So he went to Hajar. "Get Ismail," he said. "Get ready for a long journey." They walked for many days till they reached a dry valley of the desert near the Al-Marwa mountain. The prophet then turned around and started walking away. His wife hurried after him. "Where are you leaving us?" she cried to him. But the prophet did not answer her and kept walking away. She called him again, but the prophet remained silent and walked away. Finally, she understood that the prophet was not acting on his own. She realized that Allah had commanded him to do this. He prayed to Allah to give his wife and son enough food, and he asked Allah to send people with good hearts to them. The water finished very soon, and both of them started getting very thirsty. After some time, the baby started getting thirsty and started to cry. She ran to a hill close by called Al-Marwa. She stood there hoping to find somebody, but she did not. Then she ran to the next mountain called Al-Safa, hoping to find someone from there. But she couldn't find anyone from there either. She kept running between these mountains 7 times. When she climbed Al-Marwa for the last time, she was very tired. It was then that she heard a voice. She kept quiet and waited to hear the voice again. When she heard the voice for the second time, she said, "Oh, whoever you might be, you have made me hear your voice. Have you got something to help me?" That was when she saw an angel digging the earth. The angel kept digging till the water flowed from it. It was a miracle. When she saw the water, she ran toward it and started to build a basin around it. She scooped the water with her hands and drank from it. Then she filled her water bag and ran towards her child. This place where the water rose is called Zamzam. After a few days, some people were traveling through Mecca. They saw the birds flying around Al-Marwa, and then they started walking towards Al-Marwa. When they arrived, they were surprised to find a woman with a baby sitting near the water. "Shall we stay here and use this water, please?" they asked her. Hajar said yes, and they drank water from the Zamzam, like that many others came to Al-Marwa and eventually settled down there. The whole place became alive now, and she and her child were not alone anymore. Ismail grew up and learned Arabic from the people who had settled down at Al-Marwa. He was a good boy, and his virtues and qualities made the people admire him. He kept thinking about his father and knew that his father would come back someday. Ismail then married a local woman and lived his life in peace. In the meantime, Prophet Ibrahim was very sad because he had not seen his son for a very long time. One day, he decided to go to Mecca to meet his wife and his son. He traveled for many days and finally arrived at Al-Marwa. When he arrived, people told him that Hajar had died some time ago. The Prophet was very sad to hear this, and then the local people told the Prophet that his son, Ismail, peace be upon him, was still alive. The Prophet was very happy to hear this and thanked Allah. When Ismail finally reunited with his father, he ran to him and hugged him very tightly. He was very happy to see his father after a long, long time. One night when the Prophet was sleeping, he saw a dream. In his dream, the Prophet saw himself killing his son as a sacrifice to Allah. The Prophet woke up and ignored it as it was just a dream. But the next night, he saw the same dream again. This time he realized that this was not just a dream, and that Allah was asking him to sacrifice his own son. The Prophet went to his son and told him about the dream. Ismail realized that it was an order from Allah. "Do what Allah has asked you to," he told his father. The next day, the Prophet took a rope and a knife and set out for Mount Arafat along with his son. Upon reaching the top of the mountain, Ismail asked his father to tie his hands and legs so that he may not struggle during the sacrifice. The Prophet obliged and tied his hands and legs. Then he blindfolded himself so that he wouldn't have to watch his son suffer. The Prophet raised his knife, but then suddenly he heard the voice from the sky. He took off his blindfold and saw a sheep being sent from heaven. Allah had sent the sheep to be sacrificed instead of Ismail. The Prophet was really happy because his son was going to be alive. The Prophet and his son had just passed a difficult test from Allah. Ibrahim slaughtered the sheep and they had a big celebration. The Prophet and his son kept calling people to worship Allah. They didn't have any place to worship Allah, so one day Allah ordered the Prophet to build a house. "Allah has ordered me to build a Kaaba," the Prophet said to his son. And Ismail replied, "Do what your God has ordered you to do." The Prophet then asked his son if he could help him build the Kaaba, and Ismail agreed. They started building the foundation of the Kaaba. Ismail brought the stones, while Ibrahim built the house. When they completed the foundation and built the corners, Ibrahim asked Ismail to find the stone to fill the corner. While he was gone, an angel got the Prophet a stone. The angel told him that this stone was brought to earth by Adam from paradise. Ismail returned after some time, and when he saw the stone, he was surprised and asked his father where it came from. "It was brought by someone who never gets tired," replied Ibrahim. And they finally completed building the Kaaba. They prayed to Allah to accept their work. Allah was very happy with the Prophet and his son for spreading his message, and proclaimed the pilgrimage among men. After a few years, Prophet Ibrahim missed his son Ismail, so he went to see him. But when the Prophet reached the house of Ismail, he was not at home. His wife came out, and when the Prophet asked her about Ismail, she replied, "He has gone in search of livelihood." He then asked her how their living conditions were, to which she started complaining about everything. She complained that they were living in misery and hardship and many other things. She was not at all grateful to the blessings of Allah. The Prophet realized that she was not at all a suitable wife for his son, so left her a message that his son would understand. "When your husband returns, convey my salutations to him," he said, "and also tell him to change the threshold of the gate." The Prophet then went back to his home. When Ismail returned home in the evening, he felt something unusual. "Did anyone visit us today?" he asked her. She replied, "Yes," and passed on the message. When Ismail heard the message, he realized that it was his father who visited him that day, and he understood the message that he gave her. "It was my father, and he has advised me to divorce you. You can go back to your family." His wife went back to her house, and Ismail married another woman. After a long time, Prophet Ibrahim again missed his son, so he visited his new house once again. When he arrived, it was his new wife who answered the door. The Prophet asked the same questions he had asked his former wife. But this time, when she answered, the Prophet realized that she was a very grateful and kind woman. She kept thanking Allah for the wonderful things going on around, and the Prophet was very happy. "When your husband comes home, give him my regards," the Prophet told Ismail's wife. He also added, "And also tell him that he should keep the threshold of this gate firm." The evening when Ismail came back, he asked his wife if anyone had come to visit him. When his wife told him about the Prophet and the message, Ismail was very happy. "It was my father," said Ismail, "and you are the threshold of the gate. He asked me to keep you with me forever," said the Prophet happily. Years went by, and his father, Prophet Ibrahim, passed away, leaving him with the mission to continue on the spreading of Islam.